So I'm here from EPA, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the government role in EVs. And clearly, this is a very complex undertaking, getting the technology ready, dealing with the market issues, getting the incentives right, building the infrastructure. It's a very complicated network of interlocking puzzles. And all roles of government have important roles to play here, as well as all the private and nonprofit sectors. But I'm going to focus on what can be done at the federal level. So what we ask ourselves at the federal level is, what is the federal government good at? What are the things that we know how to do that will contribute to progress in this area? So I'm going to cover a few of those things. One of the things that we know how to do is to set national standards that drive technological progress. So this slide is a graph of the fuel economy standards since they were born in the 1970s. And now projecting out until 2025, because we've just announced the range of what we'd like to look at going out to 2025. So you can see where we are now is sort of at the edge of this plateau. We've already promulgated standards that will take us down a little bit, and we're now proposing standards that will go somewhere in this red zone until 2025. And I've done this graph in terms not of miles per gallon, but gallons per mile, because I want to illustrate that what we're trying to do is drive towards zero. We're trying to push this down as close as we can to zero, as close as the technology will let us get there. And so that's the direction we're headed in. And so hopefully what this will do is, as manufacturers need to meet more and more stringent standards, they will need more and more zero emissions cars, and EVs are going to be classified, at least the first chunk of them are going to be classified as zero. We're not going to make them take into account the upstream emissions from power plants as an incentive to get EVs out there. So for each manufacturer, the first 200,000 basically are free on the zeros. So if you're looking at a 35 mpg standard for your fleet, and you have some zeros, that helps you meet the 35. So that's one thing we do, is we do national standards that push technology. Another thing the federal government is really good at is giving lots of money to things. This is the danger of having printing presses. We give big money to lots of things. So in the last round of stimulus money, for example, there was a couple of $2 billion that went into EV technology, especially batteries, but not only batteries, other components of EVs. So that's another important role for us to play, is actually funding the technology. A third role that we play is we use the federal tax code. That is a huge chunk of our economy, and it's been a way historically that we've driven many different policy initiatives, is by creating tax penalties or tax incentives for certain kinds of behavior. So for EVs, there have been tax incentives for a while. They are continuing. That same first 200,000 vehicles per manufacturer will qualify for tax incentives for the consumer. So it's a way to, there's funding going to manufacturers, and at the same time there are incentives to consumers for the same universe of vehicles. So we're hoping to push and pull people towards this technology. There's a tax credit of up to $7,500, ranges between $2,500 and $7,500 depending on the capacity of the battery. So that's another way that we're using the presence of the federal government throughout our economy to really drive people towards buying these vehicles. And a final tool that we have is to be early adopters ourselves. And you may not think of the federal government as really out there on the edge of early adoption of technology, but we did just upgrade to Microsoft Office 2003. we are learning. We hope to be even farther ahead of the curve on electric vehicles. There have been a number of press reports about GSA putting out orders for electric vehicles, and some of them are a little exaggerated. But we are in the market for electric cars. We hope to have them out on the street as federal vehicles, and there's symbolic importance to it, but then there's also, over time, there's a real market importance to it. We have really big fleets. And if the federal government moves towards electric vehicles as a significant component of our own fleet, that's a steady, reliable market for the manufacturers. So those are some of the things that the federal government can do. Push the standards, give lots of money, create tax incentives, be early adopters. The final thought I'd like to leave you with federal government, we have our hands in a lot of different things. And EVs are a very complex issue, and the complexity spills beyond the traditional air and energy world. And I'd like to give you one illustration of that. The country is launching into a very major push driven by EPA on stormwater pollution, because it's the last remaining source it's the largest remaining source of water quality problems. And the issue in many water bodies is runoff from roads and parking lots, and it's runoff of both metals and nutrients that come from car exhaust. And so one thought I'd like to leave you with is to think about the possible connections between a program that's going to cost several $100 billion to get those pollutants out of our stormwater, and are there possibly connections and resources there maybe to actually remove the pollution in the first place from the car exhaust? Could EVs be a stormwater pollution control technique? Maybe some of the funding that would have gone into capturing the pollutants once they're in the stormwater could go instead to building EV infrastructure that could in some cases be a more cost-effective way of addressing a water pollution problem. So one of the roles the federal government can play, having our hands in all different aspects of environmental issues, is to try and work some of those connections and see if maybe there's leverage that could be brought to bear from other environmental programs that we may not have even thought about as we think about EVs as a climate change or an energy or an air quality program. I think I'll stop there and turn it over to the next.